Good morning, all of you mysterious self-transformers. I've decided to break out the Black Flame Tarot again, and this time I did just a general reading, and as often happens, it was pretty particular to some of my circumstances, favorably so, which I was happy to see. But I'll try to keep it general for the benefit of everyone watching and listening. I'll mention to start out a couple of significant points. Of course, here we see two of the major arcana, giving this a fairly heavy weight. What we see here has a long-term bearing on life, and it will not allow us to come back from them. This involves change, the sort that remains permanent and even changes the trajectory of our overall path, which seems appropriate since both of the cards include roadways. I like that. So to start there, before that though, I'll also mention I see some interesting numerological significance in all of these cards, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. But here, if we want to view this as a past card, we've got where some decisions were made. Maybe life was running somewhat out of control, like a wild horse that needs reining in. A couple of questions to ponder. Have the rider and this chariot driver decided to escape from the city in the background? Has something happened that they fear or need to run away from? This depiction reminds me so much of Arjuna and Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, which has some very strong psychological implications and interpretations. Only we can decide individually whether this represents a fearful fleeing from some perceived catastrophe or moving on to something better, moving past the influence of all those onlookers in life. And that meaning will probably change as you draw the card. We see the lovers, which represent choice. And again, we see roadways. We have to decide, do we see roadways coming apart as two people move away from one another? Or do we see two roads merging together? Or do we see some of both, where these two roads come together for people who have had their own respective pairs of roads come apart, perhaps even in the recent past? Again, that makes the tarot so beautiful. It can apply to many things. In this case, it applies to something positive, and we see things coming together in a positive way. Now, numerologically, I find it interesting. 6 and 7, very close cards. I also see the Queen of Pentagrams interesting. One of the minors, one of the court cards, which I interpret as a stepping stone between the 6s and the 7s in a 10-base tarot degree system, where we need to find a place for those other 4 cards in each suit. In this case, I say we need to remember that this does not represent some inevitable move in the right direction. we can't stay seated like our royal friend here. We need to make a decision, and the previous situations, which have both involved choice, how to interpret things, how to move forward, will inform how we make decisions that will continue to affect our environment. And look at all that green, right? Really a growth-oriented color. So if we do it right, and we contemplate those things, from our past, those archetypal changes that have taken place and may continue to take place, we can direct the environmental factors of that life, which include, of course, money, job, friends, home environment. What we put in comes back out. The quality that we put in to life and into ourselves, we get back, sort of a you are, you can eat, but on a greater scale. Now, I often like to draw an additional card when I see a court card, just to determine whether this has to do more with a particular person of the represented gender, in this case a female, or a trait. And because we didn't get another court card, we got a wand, a numbered suit card. That indicates to me that we have a trait. And we see that these overarching life circumstances that we talked about will have an influence on the environmental aspect of our lives, but this will establish a feedback loop between that aspect of our life and the creative aspect, which we now know how better to use. I keep drawing attention to these for a reason. We know how to better use this to drive our purpose. And in so doing, we can create situations, relationships, and a more suitable environment for our life to unfold and for us to direct. See, now that we know, now that we've learned some things, we can stand up and act like the king or queen of our life and create things. Still, we'll need to gather some experience and maybe hone in our purpose. But we find ourselves well on our way to doing so. We can't stay seated until the right time comes along, because the right time will never come along. To get to where we need to go, we have to stand up, we have to start moving, we have to accept that we'll learn much of what we'll need to get there along the way.